this together. Worthy of every song we could ever sing. Worthy of all the praise we could ever bring. Sing worthy. Save Jesus. He's worthy of every breath we could ever breathe. We live for you. Who do you live for? Oh, we live for you, Jesus. Sing holy. There is no one like you. There is none beside you. Open up my eyes in wonder and truth.
Our voices together. We want to worship who He is. We will build our lives on His foundation. Let's sing this together.
I will build my life
good this morning? Am I the only one hot in here? Boy, it's warm. Good to see you this morning. Happy Thanksgiving, belatedly. Hope you've had a good weekend. It's been a wonderful time of year for us. So we're coming today to the end of our covenant series. And today our focus is on conflict. So just to quickly reset the stage, we've been talking about the Baldwick model for family relationships, a theological model of covenant, grace, empowerment, and intimacy. And last week we looked at how intimacy is best played out in the area of communication. How well we communicate, how well our partner, how well our parents and our kids are able to hear our hearts. But tied up, bound up inevitably with communication is conflict. So in order to be a covenant family, we need to learn how to manage conflict in a way that is acceptable and that doesn't tear us apart. So in order to begin that, I need somebody's help up here. Glenn, just somebody who would come up and be willing to give me a hand. Glenn, all right, you come up. I need one other person to help me. Can I get one other volunteer? Can I get a woman so I can balance it off? You, great. All right. Well, you come. But I'm going to ask you if you would do me a favor. Yeah, that was conflict right there. Can you stand behind the black screen so you can't see what we do? And then back there. I don't mind if you hear, but I just don't want you to see. And then you can come up in just a moment. Glenn, good to see you. You have a good Thanksgiving?
I did.
Excellent. All right. So we're going to play a little game up here, Glenn. It's a very simple little game that I know you're very good at. But despite that, because you are on the spot, I'm going to give you the first move in a game of tic-tac-toe. So, all right, you're going with the X's. Very good. Huh.
There you go. Good job.
Good job.
You're really good.
Are we done? He says you're really good at this.
Don't play him again.
Now, can you stand here just for a second, Lynn? Don't run off. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to erase this. And guys, if you don't mind getting a mic for Glenn in just a moment here. All right. Now, her name? Darlene. That was Darlene right there that hit her? Okay, all right. Darlene, come on up. Darlene, we're glad you're here. Come right on up. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to play a game of tic-tac-toe, and we're going to give you, Darlene, since you're the one on the spot, I'm going to give you the first move. Fair enough?
I can be X.
You can be whatever you want to be. X, O, put it wherever you want to put it. Think carefully. All right. You have to kind of press. There you go. All right. Darlene, very good. I'm going to hold this so it doesn't roll off. Your move. This is not looking good for me, is it? Yeah.
No one's going to win.
No one's going to win?
Except me. No, you can't do that.
Huh?
You can't do that. You cheated.
I cheated? How do you know I cheated?
Because you can't take up 2 spots.
Okay. Is it your turn or my turn?
It's my turn.
Your turn. All right, your turn. All right. Very good. All right. Thank you, Darlene. Now come over here by Glenn here for a moment. So Glenn, first I want to ask you, where'd you learn to play tic-tac-toe?
As a kid.
As a kid.
Yeah.
Don't remember where?
Couldn't tell you where.
It was not in
Probably
the sermon,
school.
right?
Today.
All right,
Relearned
Glenn.
it, yeah.
At school, probably, all right?
Yeah.
Darlene, where'd you learn to play?
I don't remember.
You don't remember.
I was probably little.
Okay?
Yeah.
As opposed to now.
Yeah.
As opposed to now? So Glenn and Darlene, actually both of you, when you came up to play, why didn't you ask me what the rules were?
We trusted you.
Darlene?
Because I already knew what the rules were.
Already knew what they were.
Yeah.
Okay? So one last question. When it comes to fighting, and I'm using fighting not in the sense of physical fighting, but between people, emotional issues, and so forth. Where did you learn to fight?
Oh.
Darlene, you got an answer behind that, I think.
You go first.
Okay, Glenn?
At home and school.
Home,
Yeah.
home and school. Very good.
He
Darlene?
took my answer.
All right, so home and school as
Yeah.
well. All right.
Yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank them, because it's kind of awkward to have to get up here when you don't know what's happening and somebody else is putting you on the spot. Now, if I could get Kristen, and Kristen, if you don't mind erasing that board, I would appreciate it. So let me point out something that's very interesting. I would have done exactly as Glenn and Darlene did in terms of not asking what are the rules, because, I mean, it's tic-tac-toe, right? We all know the rules, or at least we assume we all know the rules. Then it's curious what happens in the game when somebody changes the rules and does something totally different. Glenn is like, hey, congratulations, you won. Thank you, Glenn. Darlene is like, no, you're not doing that to me. And she's erasing mine, saying, I won this game. We can have all kinds of responses to that. This is nothing like a psychological test. It's a simple illustration. But it's an illustration for this purpose. We all learn somewhere how to do conflict. I would suspect that the most common answer across the board would be we learn to fight, have conflict in our homes. Watching mom and dad, being with siblings, all of that. And the second place would be in school. That's where we learn. But what's curious is we all grow up with a certain set of rules about how to fight. Those rules are spoken, verbalized, you can't hit anybody, that kind of thing. Or they're unspoken, but we know them and we obey them. Like in this family, dad can get mad at anybody, but nobody can get mad at dad. Nobody ever told us that, but we knew it and we lived it. And then we grow up and we go off to university and we get to staring across the dental chair at the other dental student and we fall in love and we date and we get married and we never sit down and have a very simple conversation, which is, okay, what are the rules? How are we going to do conflict? And then when conflict arises, which it inevitably will, we can end up fighting about how to do conflict. You can't do that. I just did it. Then where do you go from that point? So it becomes very important to talk with each other about the boundaries. What are the boundaries around conflict? Because the truth is, conflict, fighting of almost every kind I can think of has boundaries, has rules. You can be a country that goes over and bombs this other country in a fully declared war, and you still are supposed to be bound by the Geneva Conventions. Or you can put tough, hard gloves on two people, say put them on two men, you say get in that ring and hit him so hard in the head that you cause a concussion. But if you bite his ear, fight's over, can't do that. And they'll end the fight like they did with Mike Tyson. And you're like, it's just his ear. You're telling to hit him in the brain. Well, those are the rules. And that's the reality of human conflict. So when it comes to our marriages, when it comes to our families, mom or dad and kids, how are we to manage our conflict? It's a key question because conflict, if you have two people who both think you're going to have conflict. So how can you keep it healthy? And what prohibits it from going in a negative direction? In fact, maybe even another more important question is, does God care about our conflict? Does God care about how we manage anger when it arises? Well, we're going to come to that in Paul's writing, but before we get to that, I first of all want to take some time to set the stage for what it is that creates challenges. So I start with a couple of quotes from Scott Stanley's book, A Lasting Promise, A Christian Guide to Fighting for Your Marriage. This is fairly different from a lot of Christian writing about marriage and parenting and all the rest, because it's solidly based on his and Howard Markman's research of many years. So he draws that in very creative ways. Listen to how one of the very first things he says, how he sets the stage for this issue of conflict. He says there's a great deal of evidence. Now he's talking about his research. There's a great deal of evidence that distressed couples show major differences from happier couples in their ability to handle conflict. That premise right there has led me to decide years ago that if I only have one chance to talk with a pre-marriage couple before they get married, thankfully I usually have much more than that, but if I only had one chance, what I would want to talk about would be how they manage conflict. Because if you can manage conflict, you can get through most things. But if you can't manage conflict, even simple issues become major. They can become the rotten apple that spoils the whole bushel. So then Stanley goes on to talk about one study they did involving 135 couples over 12 years. Reflecting back on that study, he says, by using only data before these couples married, we, along with a number of other researchers, have been able to differentiate those who do well over time from those who do not with 80 to 91% accuracy up to 12 years later. It's the same kind of research that Gottman up in the Northwest will say, we can give you an instrument before you get married and predict with between 91 and 94% accuracy whether or not you'll still be married in 15 years. And a lot of people say, I don't want anywhere near that. It's too scary. But the question ought to be, so just what is it that allows them to be able to do that? Let this sink in a moment, Stanley says. What this means is that for many couples, the seeds of distress and a future divorce are there from early in the marriage, and in many cases, before the couple even says, I do. So before you get to that place, there are already seeds that will later bear fruit. So what exactly are those seeds, and what is it based on? One more quote from Stanley. According to research conducted by our team at the University of Denver, as well as by other researchers around the company, it's the presence of certain negative patterns that can destroy a relationship. So their premise is, and this is true of both Stanley and Markman and of Gottman, the premise is if you can identify the negatives and eliminate those, there are a plethora of other ways to do it. Now, having said all that, I want to give you a conclusion I personally have reached over the years. You might disagree with this and see it differently, and maybe you're right, but this is based upon my study and my observation, is that regardless of what the current topic is in any conflict, that most all conflict has one theme that runs through it. In other words, whether, let's say you're a couple, a married couple, and you're fighting about finances or about sex or about in-laws or about child rearing or whatever it is, whatever that topic is, I want to suggest to you that there is a theme in common that runs through all of them. And that is, as couples get distressed, one of the realities they start saying is, you're not hearing me. You're not listening to me. So go back to last week, communication. Intimacy is the ability to truly hear each other's hearts. As couples get distressed, it's very easy to stop listening. And then the other person feels like they're not being heard. So what do? They crank up the volume. Say it again, only louder. And when it gets louder, the other person gets defensive, and then the other person gets even more panicked that you're not hearing me, and so they come on stronger, and they get into this cycle that is not helpful. At the foundation, at the heart of which may be this feeling, I'm not being heard. We turn up the volume in some interesting ways. So Gottman has found 4 negative conflict styles in his research that are so negative, he calls them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So that'll give you somewhat of an idea. So they are criticism, contempt. Can you see this? I'm writing hard with this, but it's not. Disrespect, defensiveness. There you go. Thank you, Kelly. Defensiveness, and finally, stonewalling. These are the 4 that Gottman has found in his research with his colleagues. And he says, if you are engaging in these, you are headed to marital challenges, sometimes deep challenges, and they can often be precursors to divorce. I'm going to leave those there because I want to talk about Stanley's and Markman's discoveries. They have some clear parallels with Gottman's discoveries, but they also have some differences. Also 4 negative conflict styles that will predict marital disruption and could predict divorce. So the first one of Stanley's research styles is one he calls escalation. Escalation. So I'm grateful that Scotty and Kelly are willing to play a married couple today. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't an actual married couple doing this because it gets a little, tense. But Scotty and Kelly are a married couple for today, and they're really troubled. And we're going to watch what happens with escalation. So this is a morning when they're in the restroom, they're getting ready for the day, combing hair, brushing teeth, doing all that kind of stuff. And this happens.
You'd think you could put the cap back on the toothpaste.
Oh, and you never forget to put it back?
As a matter of fact, I always put it back.
Oh, I forget just how obsessive and compulsive you are.
I don't even know I'm with you anymore. You're so negative.
Maybe you shouldn't stay. No one's barring the door.
I'm not sure where I do stay anymore.
Now, what did that take? 20 seconds? 25 seconds? In a very brief time, we go from the cap on the toothpaste to divorce. Now, what's interesting is that these scenes we're going to see today are not ones we made up. These come straight out of Stanley and Markman's work and couples they actually saw in their research. This is a distressed couple. One of the reasons is their escalation happens so quickly. So what is escalation? Escalation is the act of taking what your partner says and instead of hearing it for what it is, you see it and you up the ante and push it right back in their face. And then they see it, they up the ante, push it back in your face. And this continues as you escalate to an ever more hostile place. You can't do this in an endless way before somebody does walk out the door. You cannot dance at the edge of the precipice forever without sooner or later going over the precipice. What escalation is trying to do, it's trying to say, hear me. This is important to me. Listen to what I'm saying. But instead of listening, the other person comes back at you in a very aggressive way, and you're trying to be defensive, and a best defense is a good offense, so you go back after them, and pretty soon the ability to listen has completely shut down. And all you're doing is attacking each other. Escalation can be not only just damaging, but deadly to a relationship. Here's what's amazing. The ability to fix escalation is incredibly simple. Not easy, I'm not saying that, because it can be profoundly hard, but it's very simple. And it can best be captured in the words of the wise man in the book of Proverbs, where he says, a soft answer turns away anger. In other words, the best answer for escalation is simply to hear what your partner says, what your parent says, what your child says. Just hear them. Just listen to them. And then respond non-aggressively. That's the first very damaging conflict style, escalation. Next one is invalidation. They give this a subtitle of painful put-downs, invalidation. Invalidation is when you not only invalidate their perspective, but you invalidate them as a person. You put them down as a person. Maybe you call them a name. Maybe you make a comment about their family that's very denigrating. Invalidation. So we go back to Scotty and Kelly. This time, dealing with meal, the evening, gotten home from the day, and it's while they're eating that Kelly discovers that Scotty forgot his doctor's appointment. This is what happens.
You missed your doctor's appointment? You're so irresponsible. I could see you dying and leaving me just like your father.
Thanks a lot. You know I'm nothing like my father.
He was a creep, and so are you.
I'm sorry. I forgot my good fortune to be married to such a paragon of responsibility. You can't even keep your purse straight and organized.
At least I'm not so obsessive about stupid little things.
You are so arrogant.
That's pretty hostile. Again, a real couple. Is it any wonder that both Stanley and Markman in their research and Gottman in his research in the one horseman of the apocalypse called contempt say that this one reality, invalidation is what one calls them, contempt is what the other calls it, this is the most predictive of divorce. If you have gotten to this point, it's not good. If you are dating and you're at this point, put on your running shoes. And I'm not joking, I'm being serious. If you are married and you're at this point, this must find a way to stop. It must not continue. Again, I would go back to saying part of this is trying to get the other person to hear me. So she is apparently driven by a fear that he's going to have something. The doctor needs to catch it. She doesn't want him to die as his father did. Maybe that's the fear that's driving her. Then keep it at that level. Rather than coming out with guns blazing, say, oh, that worries me so deeply. I'm concerned about your health. I'm worried about my future if something happens to you. Name it for what it is, rather than invalidating and treating him in a contemptuous manner. So that's the second negative conflict style. Third negative conflict style is one called negative interpretations. Some call this mind reading. This is when you take what the other person is saying and then you give it the meaning that you know they really intended to say, whether or not they really intended to say that. And that's a piece of quicksand that is very hard to get out of. So we go back to Kelly and Scotty. So it's holiday time when people start thinking about visiting family for Christmas, maybe for Thanksgiving just passed. And Kelly's approaching Scotty as he's doing the bills. They have a child who has an orthodontist, and that's expensive. He's doing the bills, and she wants to go see her family, and this is what happens.
Hey, maybe we can start looking into plane tickets to visit my parents this holiday season.
I was wondering if we can really afford it this year.
My parents are very important to me. Even if you don't like them, I'm still gonna go.
I would like to go, really I would. I just don't see how we can afford $1,000 in plane tickets and pay the bill for Joey's orthodontist.
You can't even be honest and admit to me. You just don't wanna go. Just admit it. You don't like my parents.
There's nothing to admit here. I enjoy visiting your parents. I'm thinking about money here, not your parents.
That's a convenient excuse.
Where do you go from there? If you have gotten to the place where there is not the ability to trust what your partner is saying as valid and true, it's really difficult to climb out of that quicksand. The honest answer is to be able to say what you mean and mean what you say and trust what your spouse says as well as he or she trusts what you say. It's the ability to openly communicate and to be able to state what the real issue is, if indeed it's there. For example, in this case, Kelly may have reasons for which she feels he doesn't like her family. If so, when he says, I don't think we can afford this, then be straightforward and say, is this about money or is this about my parents? And if he's honest and says it's about money, then she has a choice of whether or not to believe that. If he says, anxious about your parents after last year, I didn't have any desire to go back. Then they've got something to discuss. There's trust on the one hand, trustworthy behavior on the other. The bottom line is that they need to be able to hear what's going on in their hearts. Jesus spoke to this in the Sermon on the Mount when he said, let your yes be yes and your no be no. Everything else will get you in trouble. That's my paraphrase. Speak truthfully. Give your spouse, your parent, your child reason to believe you. Interestingly enough, this is one of the more difficult ones to resolve. Why? Because the ultimate resolution lies in the mind of the person who says, this is about money, not about your parents. And until that can be trusted, it's hard to get beyond it. The final negative conflict style that Stanley and Markman have discovered is one called withdrawal and avoidance. This is very much like the one that Gottman calls stonewalling. This is the one that doesn't want to deal with an issue or with issues. There's nothing wrong here. I don't want to talk about it. So we go back to Kelly and Scotty. This time, again, this couple has a child, and Kelly's a bit concerned about Scotty's anger. She's seen Scotty doing some things with his anger that have concerned her. What's going to happen if our child gets involved in this? So she approaches him as he's working on the taxes to try to talk about the issue.
When are we going to talk about how you handle your anger?
Can't this wait? I have to get these taxes done.
I've brought this up at least 5 times already. No, it can't wait.
What's there to talk about anyways? It's none of your business.
Tanya is my business. I'm afraid that one day you may lose your temper and hurt her, and you will not do a single thing to learn to deal better with your anger.
I love Tanya. There's no problem here.
You have to get some help. You can't keep sticking your head in the sand like this.
I'm not going to discuss anything with you when you're like this.
Like what? It doesn't matter if I'm calm or frustrated. Every time I talk about anything important with you, you just don't talk to me about it. Tanya is having problems, and you have to face that right now. Well?
I'm going out for some peace and quiet.
Talk to me now. I'm tired of you leaving every single time we have an issue. You won't talk to me about anything important.
I'm not talking, you are. Actually, you're yelling. See you later.
Now, if you've ever been in Kelly's position, you can understand the depth of despair when the other person will not talk with you about something that is an issue. And you probably also understand after these 4 vignettes why I didn't want 2 people who were married to each other. But anyway, that aside, excellent job they did. Withdrawal and avoidance. There's not a problem here. It's the same as stonewalling over here. I don't have anything to talk with you about. It can be profoundly discouraging. This, as common as it is one of the most damaging of all 4, interestingly enough. I think it's one of the most common ones in a professional community like this one. Because when people get home from work, whatever your job might be, they're overwhelmed, they're tired, things are tough at the office, the construction site, or wherever it is that they work, and the spouse says, we got to talk about something. It's like, why do we need to talk about that? I'm tired. And they can push that away and allow it to just build up, and it becomes like the proverbial balloon which you're blowing up, and it gets so big that finally that last little, just one little puff of air is enough to cause the whole thing to explode. So if you have really big reactions over fairly small issues, it may be an indicator that you've been doing this. What is the resolution to that? Very simple. Listen to your parent, your child, your spouse, whoever it is that is raising the issue. As much as possible, listen non-defensively. Create the experience for them that they are being heard. And things can change and change quite dramatically. Having said all of this, I'll say one simple thing about conflict and arguing. I have come to the personal conclusion that arguing or argument is pretty much always bad for a relationship. But that conflict is positive and can be the fertile soil for growth. Now, here's the problem. Arguing and conflict can look and sound the same in certain senses. There can be passion, there can be anger, there can be emotional feelings that rise rather quickly. All of those can happen in both of them. So the question becomes, well, how do you tell the difference? I think you tell the difference very simply. Whenever we're talking about argument, the goal is to win. Whether you're talking about two politicians that stand on either side of the stage and a moderator in the middle asking them questions, and they are making their arguments for how they see the problem and its solution with the hopes that they can win your votes. That's the goal. Or if you're in the legal profession and we're in trial right now, you have a judge sitting up here, the jury is sitting over there, and the defense attorney and the prosecutor are both making their argument, trying to convince you that their version of events is the correct one. They are wanting to win. When it comes to relationships of intimacy, parents, children, spouses, when our goal is to win, we're both going to lose. Because no matter which one wins, the other feels defeated, and that harms your relationship. However, when it comes to conflict, which may at times sound and look like this, the goal is to understand and be understood. To understand and be understood. So what you're trying to create, even when there's passion involved, is what? The sense that both of you are getting heard. You're hearing me. And it creates that sense within a person, this other individual understands me, and I understand her, I understand him better. So when those issues arise which tend to inflame feelings, if you can, even in your own mind, if not for both of you, be very clear, what is the goal here? If the goal is to win, then you can come to a place where you throw everything into the mix necessary to win this. But if the goal is to understand and be understood, then that will guide you. It will guide the other person and how to allow the conflict to unfold. So we come now, finally, to Paul's words. Paul's words in Ephesians 4. It's the section of Paul's writing. I love this section because he is more open and more clear than in any other place in his writings about what it is that allows human relationships to flourish. It's in the last part of Ephesians, the part where he's talking about really living the life of the disciple. And in the NIV, it's under a heading called Instructions for Christian Living. And it's all framed against the backdrop of him saying, speak the truth, but do it in love. So he has this tension between the two. Truth here, love here. If you err too far to one side or the other, you're going to get off course. Speak the truth, but do it in love. Against that backdrop, he says, verse 25, therefore each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. He's talking to the church, but it applies to family. Be truthful, be honest, be clear. Defeat some of these kinds of things that can so quickly take over by being truthful and being loving. That's his first statement. Second statement, in your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry. Now, be careful about being too literalistic about that. I can remember in our first year of marriage being up at like 1 a.m. telling Nina, we got to solve this. We're both still mad. She's like, can't we just go to bed? No, we got to say, the sun already went down. Oh. Well, anyway, we can't do it before we go to bed. Worst possible time to solve something when you're both wiped out tired. I later thought, man, if you want to be literalistic about this, move to Alaska. You can be mad all summer. Sun never goes down. What Paul is saying is keep short emotional accounts. Don't let things just go on and on. Why? Because of the next verse where he says, do not give the devil a foothold. Do you know what he's saying there? I looked it up. Dictionary, the definition for foothold is where you can get a good, strong foothold to launch you in the direction you're wanting to go, to accomplish what you're intent on accomplishing. Against the backdrop of anger, Paul is saying, don't let anger give the devil a foothold in your life to launch you in the direction he wants you to go. And how do you keep from doing that? Keep short emotional accounts, which once again will be very damaging to these negative conflict styles. Then Paul continues. Anyone who has been stealing must steal no longer, but must work, doing something useful with their own hands, that they may have something to share with those in need. Clearly speaking into a situation at the Ephesian church. But the principle is this. Live a life that gives, not a life that takes. Even in your own families. Be willing to have open-handedness with your loved ones rather than tight-fistedness. Then he continues. Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Years ago, I was at an American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy National Conference in Washington, D.C. One of the leading secular researchers in the field was up giving a plenary about the research that he and his team were doing. Very fascinating, very interesting. Hundreds, probably a couple thousand therapists there. And then he paused, secular person, paused and said, after all the research we've done about marriages and troubled marriages and the difficulties therein, I have come to believe that most of the problems we have in families are simply due to the way we talk to each other. This is a secular researcher. Most of the problems, just the way we talk to each other. And what does Paul say? Do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is useful for building others up. Wow. There's no way I can do that without the Spirit in my life. But then Paul comes to the last verse, and I just think, what if this governed our family relationships, including our conflict? He writes this at the end of the chapter. Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, along with brawling and slander. Be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other, just as in Christ God forgave you. What a vision for family life and family relationships, for family conflict. Don't run from conflict. Just learn to manage it in healthy ways. Determined by the grace of God and the power of the Spirit to nip in the bud those things that can be so damaging and to learn to hear each other. So I have one more assignment for you, one last assignment in this covenant series. Anyone can do it, whether you're married, not married, have kids, don't have kids. You can do it with your parents, your siblings, your kids, your spouse, whoever it is. It's not original with me, but I'd like to make it your assignment for this week. So this week, when you can feel things starting to get tense between you and that other person, you can feel it coming. You usually can. You feel it coming. With a quick help me prayer to God. Who was it that said, I only prayed 2 kinds of prayers? Help me, help me, help me, and thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, this is a time when you can feel it starting to come up. Say, help me, God, and then do 3 things. 3 simple things. First, let the other person tell their story. That's hard. Let the other person tell their story. Second, let the other person tell their whole story. That's even harder. And third, let the other person tell their whole story first. 3 simple steps. Let the other person tell their story. Let them tell their whole story. Let them tell their whole story first. And then determine from that point, I'm going to listen and be lovingly honest. You're going to need God's help, but you're going to enjoy God's power in a covenantal relationship. Let's pray together. Gracious God, thank you that how we conduct our families matters to you. And the reason it does is that every member of the family matters and needs to be honored. So encourage us, bless us, and empower us to that end. In the name of Jesus. And all God's people said, Amen.
Let's keep worshiping this morning. Let's sing this out. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life. Do you believe it, church? Oh, praise. Oh, it's the one who paid my debt. You praise the one who paid my debt, raised this life up from the dead. The Savior saved, thy strength indeed is small, a child of weakness, watch and pray, find in me thine all and all. Jesus paid it all. Every voice. Oh, sin, he washed it white as snow. Indeed I find thy power and thine alone can change the leper's spots and melt the heart. We sing to him, Jesus paid. Jesus paid it all. To him sin is left. Sin he washed it white as snow. Jesus paid it. Oh, we sing all to him. Oh, sin is left. He washed it white as snow. He's alive and he's roaring like a lion this morning. We sing, oh, praise the one, oh, praise. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life. If you have a voice, let's sing, oh, praise. Oh, do you believe it, church? Oh, praise. Life up from the dead. Oh, we praise your name. We thank you for the cross. We thank you for your grace, your mercy. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life up from. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised this life. We sing one more time. Oh, praise. Oh, praise.